in our business, there's a lot of people who have been on-air personalities, including me. And then there are a handful of folks who could be considered legends, and Gary Burbank is one of them. And we found out yesterday that he passed away at the age of 84. I didn't really work closely with Gary at any point during my time at the radio station. I was working on, before I was on the air, on other shows, but certainly somebody I got a chance to spend time with and got to know a little bit. And as funny as he was on air, he was even funnier off, and he was extraordinarily kind. You probably have heard me talk about this before. I at times get asked about how I got in the business or why I got in the business. And again, showing my age, as a little kid, all I wanted to do was be on the radio. All I wanted to do when I was a little bit older was just work at a radio station. And one of those shows that made an impression on me was Gary's show for two reasons. Number one, we talked about this after the NFL draft when Shedeur Sanders was the, quote, victim of prank phone calls. And I said, I can't pile on somebody who makes prank phone calls because, boy, as a kid, I made a lot of prank phone calls. And one of the reasons why was on Gary Burbank's show, he had these characters who made funny phone calls. And so if you were a radio dork, which I was, and to a degree still am, as a 12, 13, 14-year-old, 15-year-old, I'm sure I'm not alone in saying that at that time in my life, when I would listen to shows like Gary's and others, where part of the bit was funny phone calls. Not mean, not malicious, but just funny phone calls with characters like Gilbert Gnarly and Riley Gert and many others. We would make prank phone calls. It sort of inspired us to, we could do that, and we did, and it never is funny. But I used to also listen to Sports or Consequences. I was trying to think last night when we were flying home from Kansas City. I called Sports or Consequences 3 times, and I can't remember the questions I asked Gary and the crew. I did not stump them. But for the life of me, I cannot remember. And I'm sure they were easy to answer questions. But I loved listening to that part of Gary's show. Because to me, the best radio shows are the ones where everybody just sounds like they're having a blast. And when I'm ever asked about getting into this business, I always talk about, growing up and listening to a lot of radio, it always just sounded so fun. And it is. But it always just sounded like the people on the air were having a blast. And to me, that show was the pinnacle of that. It wasn't about the sports questions. It was about, here's Gary and God knows who else in studio, and they just sound like they're having so much fun. And I remember as a listener, before I started, before I actually got a job in radio as a high school kid, as a college kid, listening to that thinking, I want to be a part of that. And I thought about that often when I found out that Gary passed. He was a very nice man. And the reason I bring up Sports or Consequences is I started working at the radio station as an intern in 1997. Gary retired in 2007. And so over, so many years, you get to know him a little bit, say hello, always friendly, always kind, always encouraging. And for the most part, we were here during different times of day, so I didn't spend a ton of time around him. But when he was going to retire, which was 2007 or 2008, I don't remember the exact year, toward the end of his time on the air, I saw him in the hallway. And I had been thinking about this for a long time, for years. By then, our show, the one, that I'm hosting now was finally on, and I was finally a full-time on-air personality doing sports, which is what I really wanted to do. And for such a long time, I had thought, I just want to ask Gary if I could sit in once on Sports or Consequences. And so maybe 2 or 3 months before he was going to retire, and he retired at the end of the year. It was in December, so it was kind of late summer, early fall. I finally asked him, Gare, before you go, can I just once sit in on that show, sit in on that part of your show, and he could not have been cooler. And it was like the next day or later that week, I was in studio with the guys, and, he made it sound like I was an A-list guest instead of just another dude working at the radio station, and it was a blast. And so for me, it was like this huge full circle moment. Here is this show that I once called into. Here is this segment that I once called into, and now I'm a very, very tiny part of it, at least for one day. And so I've never forgotten that. Always thought it was so kind of him to do. He could have said no. He could have said, go shove it, go do your own. He could not have been more welcoming. He's a very nice man. And, it's doing this job is, if you're a talk show host, you take calls and you argue with people and you give your opinion. And it's not that hard to do, quite frankly. Some make it look and sound very easy. I oftentimes make it look and sound hard. Gary didn't do a talk show. He didn't sit there for 3 hours and give opinions and debate with callers and interview experts. No, he did a comedy show, which meant he had to come up with fresh material every day. And he had obviously a staff and writers and a lot of really talented people. But the amount of production and the amount of work and the amount of writing and the amount of segments and the amount of characters he came up with, even before I started working here, was awe-inspiring to me. If you do a talk show, you have to come up with a few topics and, all right, here, I'm going to prepare to interview some guests. And to do a new comedy show on the radio every single day, and I'd be honest with you, I'm not entirely sure that with sensibilities having changed that a show like that would work the way it did, because nobody wants to laugh at anything anymore. But it's incredible the amount of work and time and effort and energy and people, manpower, and just production that went into that. And I think that's frankly sort of lost. I think those sort of shows don't exist anymore. And the amount of just work that it took to do one of those shows, much less 5 per week, is really something. And when I finally started working here, it was like, oh yeah, that show is as hard to execute as it sounds. But when it's executed well, and it was almost every single day, it was such a blast to listen to.